Woodlands are my absolute favourite type of habitat, and they're really amazing places to go in April and May. It's the perfect time to go exploring woodlands. Woodlands are pretty good and trees all year round because they change. So woodlands are places you can hear the birds singing really loudly. They're places where you can really get an idea of what's going on through different seasons. So in spring we get a lot of bird song, we have a lot of animals coming out and about in woodlands. And this plant here that I've just trampled on a little bit of, this is one of my favourite plants because it's really useful. And this is actually called wild garlic. So it's just like if you dug it up, you'd get a little bulb at the bottom, just like you would if you went to get garlic from the shops. And like a lot of woodland plants actually, you can actually eat this. So it does actually taste of garlic. It's not quite as strong as a garlic bulb, but you can actually put this in salads or pasta or anything like that. So it's a really cool plant, and it comes out in the spring. Covers this area in loads of white flowers, so it looks really beautiful. So I've managed to spot a couple of really nice plants just in this little corner of the woodland, and just down here is an early purple orchid. And at first, if you look at the base, when they first pop up and they don't have a flower, it just actually looks like maybe a strange bit of grass with some spots on it, or maybe the leaves of Lords and Ladies, which looks a little like this. But actually, for a few weeks in the year, only a few weeks, all the flowers come out. And actually, if you looking closely on the flowers, some of them look like animal shapes. This is a really cool plant. This is a fern, and ferns are found in a lot of woodlands. This is one of our more common ferns, but it's also a sign that this woodland is really old. It's what's called ancient woodland. And this is hart's tongue fern. And this fern you can sometimes find in hedgerows and things like that. That also shows that those hedges have been there a really long time. If you go into the woodlands in April or May, you might find a bit of a surprise waiting for you. And only for a few weeks in the year, the woodlands sometimes, if you're in the right part of the country and the right place, they go blue. And if you look down here, the bluebells have all come out in the last week or so and look totally amazing. So there's actually two different types of bluebell that we get in the UK, and that's the English bluebell, which is this one, which belongs in the UK, it grows here. And you can see it's quite delicate. All the bells hang off the stem, and they're quite downward facing. They're quite delicate. They're quite small, and they tend to grow in lovely old woodlands like this one. There's another kind of bluebell, the Spanish bluebell, and you might see that in places like roadside verges and even in people's gardens, and that looks quite different. It's a paler colour, and the flower heads are much bigger and they're more upright rather than hanging like that. So keep an eye out and see whether you think the bluebells you're spotting are Spanish bluebells or English bluebells. Even in some cities you do still get the English bluebell, and places like hedgerows are also really good places to look. There are some species of animal that really like to live in woodlands or only live in woodlands, and down here is one of them. And at first it just looks like a mound, but if you look in really closely you can see it's alive, it's totally alive and moving. And these are wood ants. And there might be 250,000 wood ants that live somewhere like this, and they'll have a series of chambers and burrows all the way down in the ground. You can see there's an entrance just here, and these wood ants form really big colonies, and they go out and they feed all over the forest. You can see they'll be communicating with each other, telling each other where they can find food, and you can see them all here all the way heading off. Oh look, one of them there has got something in its mouth. I think it's part of another insect or another ant, and it's trying to pick it up. So these wood ants, they'll 10% of their diet is other insects. And that one also looks like, what's that got? Can't quite tell what that is. But some of them are carrying food back, and yeah, a small amount of their diet will be insects and other things, and a much larger part, so 90% of their diet, will be sap from aphids. So aphids are tiny little green bugs, and what they do is they eat sap from the trees and that kind of thing that's full of sugar, and then they poo out the sap, and the sugar that's pooed out gets eaten by these ants. So these ants almost like farm the aphids and look after them and protect them from anything that might eat the aphids, and in return the aphids let them eat their sugary poo. So that is how these guys get fed, which is pretty amazing. There are some other species which just live in woodlands or really like living in woodlands, and only a few other habitats. and one of them is usually found in these little boxes. So a bit of a giveaway to start with is bird boxes always have their holes facing outwards so the birds can come in and out, and this box actually has its hole facing towards the tree trunk. Another thing which might be a little bit of a giveaway is it's on a hazel. So this is the tree with the really straight stems that used to be used for fencing and things like that. It's a bit of hazel coppice, and there's an animal called a hazel dormouse, and hazel dormice only like to live in woodlands or hedgerows or really dense habitats. So sometimes things like bramble, really dense bramble, they'll live in places like that, but they're quite picky about where they live, and they're really secretive and really rare. They only come out at night. I'm not going to look in this box today because of coronavirus. I shouldn't be handling any mammals, any animals at the moment. So I've come out tree spotting about 5 minutes down the road from where I live. Trees are amazing. There's so many different types of trees and so many different tree features that you can see. So this is a pretty amazing specimen of a tree. This is an oak tree, and if you look up you can see the leaves look really green because they've only just come out. And this tree is what's called a veteran tree, which means, just like you might say a veteran person, like a veteran from the military, is someone that's seen a lot of life, someone who's really experienced, someone who's maybe a bit older, and that's the same for this tree. So this tree has definitely seen a lot of life. This tree has probably been here for at least 200 or 300 years. It's a really, really old tree, and you can see this in a few ways. So there's lots of areas where there's holes into the trunk's really big, and it's actually gone a bit hollow inside. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but right down at the bottom there's a really big hole that I could probably actually fit inside, and that's a sign that the tree's really, really, really old. There's loads of holes, bits of flaking bark if you look upwards. There's some woodpecker holes up near the top, and this is all absolutely amazing for wildlife. So you can actually sometimes spot signs of wildlife on trees like this. You can look out for signs of barn owls. So if you've got owls in a tree, you might see white splashes down the trunk, which is a sign that they've been sitting there and pooing. Poo again, love a bit of poo. You might actually walk past a tree sometimes, and if you're really lucky you might actually hear a bit of chatting, and that might even be bats that are living in the tree, because lots of bat species live in trees. And also over 2,000 species of invertebrates actually live in trees in Britain, which is really amazing, and they feed on deadwood. And they really love trees like oak, especially big oaks like this that have lots of features on them. Trees can live a really, really long time, and the oldest tree in the world that they think is as old as 5,000 years old. So it was around about the same time or a bit before the pyramids, which is really incredible. And that tree's in North America, but in the UK we also have some really, really old trees, and one of the types of trees that grows a really long time is the yew tree. And the oldest yew tree we think we have in the UK is 2,000 to 3,000 years old, and it lives in Scotland. Different trees, it's a bit like dogs and humans, so an old dog would be maybe 15 years old, and it's the same with trees. So different types of trees tend to live for different periods of time. So an old beech tree would be about 200 years old, whereas an old yew tree, the type that's really, really old, would be about 800 years old. So it just depends on the type of tree. This one's clearly really old, and because it's basically shrunken a little bit. So what happens with trees is when they're young they try and grow really, really fast and grow as tall as possible, and as they get older they shed some of their top limbs and top branches, and then they kind of hunker down so that the wind doesn't get them when they're a little bit weaker. They also get covered in fungus and things like that, and there's lots of signs of decay. One way you can tell how old a tree is if it's been cut down, you can count the rings. Every tree puts on a new ring of growth every year. So you can see how old a tree is just by counting the rings that are slightly different colours. So this one we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then it gets a little blurry, but it looks like there might be another 6 or 7 rings there. So this tree is probably just over 20 years old. But if you get a really big tree, they can have hundreds of rings. Yew trees are evergreen, which means they keep their leaves all year round, and they're quite easy to identify because they've got needle-like leaves like that. And what I suggest you do if you want to start to learn to identify trees is just take some leaves off the tree, put them in your pocket, keep them with you, and go and press them in a book when you get home, and then you can make a bit of a leaf scrapbook and just keep an eye out on what all your different leaf types are. So that's one tree, which you can remember, that's the yew tree. That has red berries as well later in the year. Another tree that has red berries is this one over here. So a lot of you might recognise this already because you might have been prickled by this. It's really, really spiky, and you definitely don't want to put this on a chair when someone wants to sit down on it at all. I never ever do that to Richard. And it's got spikes on the end, and this is holly. So this is a holly bush, so this has red berries as well, and quite often you might see it used at Christmas time and the berries used at Christmas time. So that keeps its leaves nice and waxy like this all year round as well. And then over here, if you look up a little bit, that if you see there's some pairs of leaves, and that's what's called opposite leaves. So on each twig there's a leaf opposite the other one all the way up, and one of the ways that you can start looking at identifying trees is to see whether the leaves are opposite like that, or whether they're alternate, so whether you get one leaf and then another leaf and then another leaf. And this is actually an ash tree, and ash trees, one of the obvious things is the way that their leaves are paired like that, but another really good way of telling ash trees, and it's one of the first trees I ever learned, is because it's got these really black buds. So ash is actually quite an easy one to tell, because even in winter, even when the leaves aren't there, you can see that it's got these big black buds on it, which is a bit of a giveaway for ash. This is a hazel tree. So hazel trees, one of the ways to tell them is that their leaves are really velvety and they end in this little point here. But another great way of telling hazels is if you look at the base, there's all these quite straight stems that are springing up. A lot of the bark's covered in these tiny little lighter coloured dots, so that's quite a good way to tell the hazel. But all the stems that spring upright are called a coppice, and the way that hazels learnt to do this is fairly unbelievable actually. But a long time ago there used to be elephants or mammoths that lived in the UK, and they would come crashing through the forest in places like this, and they'd squash the hazel sticks and they'd bash them all over. And the hazel actually learned to spring up loads of new stems. Another really good tree is the hawthorn tree, and there's one of them over here. And these leaves are really different to hazels. Oh, ow! And that gives it away. It's called hawthorn because it's got thorns on it. But the leaves look a little bit, they look like that. So yeah, so they're quite like almost like a palm print, palmate. And if you look closely at the hawthorn stem, it's got these really evil looking thorns on it. So this one's not quite as fun for the elephant or for me to try and cut down because it's really prickly. And hawthorn's got a similar species called blackthorn, but the leaves look quite different. The fruits are slightly different as well. So the hawthorn berries are red. The blackthorn berries are called sloes, and they're these kind of, they almost look like blueberries on the trees, but they're not as sweet as blueberries, but you can use them. You can put them in, a lot of adults put them in things like gin, and sloe gin is really, really nice. The sloe is the fruit of the blackthorn. You could try putting them in lemonade or something like that if you wanted to give it a go, or you can make them into jam. So that they're quite a good way of getting some free food when you're out and about. If you're getting really interested and you want to go out and ID more trees, there's a few things online you can look at, or you can get yourself a book like this. This is a really old one from when I was a child, an I Spy Trees book, but I think they still make these books, which is really great, and you can tick off all the different trees that you've seen. Another thing you can do now is that there's apps, and this is the Woodland Trust app, which is really cool because you can actually type in or click on things to help you identify leaves and even from bark, so you don't even need leaves. So you can go out in winter and ID trees using this app.